What happens when a Hollywood A-lister walks into a routine morning show interview only to find himself blindsided by a host with a personal agenda? The tension in the Good Morning America studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife. What started as a simple promotional appearance for Mark Wahlberg's latest film quickly spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable moments in live television history. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about morning television. Mark Wahlberg walked onto the Good Morning America set that Tuesday morning with his usual confident stride, flashing his trademark Boston smile as he settled into the guest chair across from Michael Strahan. The studio lights were blazing, cameras rolling, and everything seemed perfectly normal for what was supposed to be a straightforward interview about his upcoming action thriller. Welcome back to Good Morning America. I'm Michael Strahan, and we're here with Mark Wahlberg, Strahan began, his voice carrying that familiar morning show enthusiasm. Mark, thanks for being with us this morning. Thanks for having me, Michael, Wahlberg replied, adjusting his jacket and leaning back comfortably. Always good to be here, but something felt off. Strahan's smile seemed forced, his eyes holding a coldness that viewers at home might have missed. But Wahlberg certainly didn't. There was an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with pre-interview jitters. So, let's talk about your new movie, Strahan continued, glancing down at his notes with an almost dismissive gesture. Another action film where you play the tough guy from Boston. Seems like you've been playing the same character for, 20 years now? The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Wahlberg's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. Well, I think each character brings something different to the table, Michael. This role in particular required a lot of physical preparation and emotional depth that I haven't explored before. Emotional depth? Strahan repeated, letting out a barely audible chuckle that the studio audience couldn't hear, but Wahlberg caught immediately. That's interesting, coming from someone who's built an entire career on playing variations of the same angry guy. The production crew exchanged glances. This wasn't in the script. The interview was supposed to focus on the film, maybe touch on Wahlberg's family life, keep things light and promotional, but Strahan seemed determined to steer the conversation into dangerous territory. I'm not sure what you're getting at here, Wahlberg said, his Boston accent becoming more pronounced as his guard went up. I've done comedies, dramas, action films. I think my body of work speaks for itself. Does it, though? Strahan leaned forward, his fake morning show smile never wavering, even as his words grew sharper. I mean, let's be honest with our viewers. When people see Mark Wahlberg in a movie, they know exactly what they're getting. The same scowl, the same tough guy routine, the same limited range. The camera captured the exact moment Wahlberg's expression shifted from confused to genuinely irritated. His hands, which had been casually resting on the armrests, now gripped them slightly tighter. You know what, Michael? I came here to talk about my film and connect with the audience, Wahlberg said, his voice steady but with an edge creeping in. If you want to turn this into some kind of roast, maybe you should have told me that beforehand. I'm just asking the questions our viewers want answered, Strahan replied smoothly, consulting his notes again. Speaking of which, let's talk about your past. You've been very open about your troubled youth, the legal issues, the time you spent in jail. Do you ever worry that your criminal background might be limiting the types of roles you get offered? The question hit like a sledgehammer. Wahlberg had indeed been open about his past mistakes, his time in juvenile detention, and his journey to redemption. But the way Strahan phrased it felt deliberately provocative and mean-spirited. That's a part of my story that I've never hidden from, Wahlberg responded, his voice tight with controlled anger. I've been honest about my mistakes because I want young people to learn from them. I've spent decades trying to make amends and give back to my community. Sure, but do you think a convicted felon should really be considered a role model? Strahan pressed, his tone remaining conversational while delivering calculated blows. I mean, you assaulted innocent people. That's not exactly the kind of background we typically associate with family-friendly entertainment. The studio fell silent except for the hum of equipment. Even the cameramen seemed uncomfortable, though they kept filming. Wahlberg's face had gone from irritated to genuinely angry. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles were visible. "I was a kid who made terrible mistakes," Wahlberg said through gritted teeth. "I've apologized. I've made amends where possible, and I've dedicated my life to being better." "What exactly are you trying to accomplish here?" Strahan asked with false innocence. "I'm just trying to understand how someone with your background became such a beloved figure," Strahan continued. "Our viewers deserve to know who they're supporting when they buy movie tickets." "You're being completely unprofessional right now," Wahlberg shot back, his famous temper beginning to surface. "This is supposed to be about my film, not a character assassination." Strahan shrugged, as if the accusation meant nothing to him. "I think character is exactly what we should be discussing. After all, you're asking people to spend their hard-earned money to watch you on screen. Don't they have a right to know what kind of person you really are? What kind of person I really am?" Wahlberg repeated, his voice rising slightly. "You want to know what kind of person I am? I'm someone who owns up to his mistakes, works hard every single day, and tries to be a good father and husband. What about you, Michael? What kind of person ambushes a guest on live television?" The tension in the studio was now impossible to ignore. The production assistants were frantically trying to signal Strahan to move on, but he seemed completely focused on his confrontation with Wahlberg, as if he had a personal score to settle. "I'm just doing my job," Strahan replied coolly. "Asking tough questions is what journalists do." "Journalists?" Wahlberg laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, this feels more like a hit job." Strahan's expression hardened at Wahlberg's accusation. The facade of morning show pleasantries was cracking, revealing something much more personal underneath. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with deliberate casualness that felt more like a challenge than a relaxed pose. "A hit job?" Strahan repeated, his voice taking on a mocking tone that cut through the studio air. "Mark, you're being awfully defensive for someone who claims to have nothing to hide. I'm simply asking questions that any responsible journalist would ask." "Cut the act, Michael," Wahlberg snapped, his patience finally wearing thin. The Boston accent was getting thicker with each word, a clear sign that his temper was rising. "You know exactly what you're doing here. This isn't journalism. This is you trying to make a name for yourself at my expense." "Make a name for myself?" Strahan let out a genuine laugh this time, cold and calculating. His eyes never left Wahlberg's face, studying every reaction like a predator watching prey. "Mark, I've been in television longer than you've been making movies worth watching. I don't need to use you for anything." The insult landed like a physical blow. Wahlberg's face flushed red, his hands now completely gripping the armrests of his chair. The leather creaked under the pressure of his grip. "You want to talk about making names?" Wahlberg said through clenched teeth. "Let's talk about how you went from riding the bench in football to riding the coattails of better hosts on this show." "Riding the bench?" Strahan's voice rose for the first time, his own composure beginning to crack. The morning show host mask was slipping, revealing something much uglier underneath. "I was a Super Bowl champion." "Something you'll never understand," Wahlberg shot back, his voice rising. "The closest you've come to real athletics is pretending to be tough in movies. At least I earned my success." Strahan's face hardened, but Wahlberg wasn't finished. "I didn't get handed a television job because the network needed to fill a diversity quota." The studio went dead silent. Even the camera operator seemed to freeze, unsure whether they should keep filming. The comment had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and everyone in the room knew it. The production assistants were frantically trying to get the attention of the director, but the confrontation was moving too fast to stop. Strahan's smile vanished completely, replaced by pure fury. His jaw tightened, and for a moment it looked like he might actually lunge across the coffee table. "Excuse me? Did you just say what I think you said?" "You heard me," Wahlberg replied, his anger now fully unleashed. All pretense of professionalism evaporated. "You want to attack my character and my career? Let's talk about how you really got where you are." "You racist piece of garbage," Strahan snarled, abandoning all morning television pleasantries. His voice carried across the studio with venom that made several crew members visibly uncomfortable. "You think because you cleaned up your act and made a few movies that we've all forgotten what you really are? What I really am?" Wahlberg stood up from his chair, towering over the seated host. His imposing frame cast a shadow over Strahan, and the physical intimidation was impossible to ignore. "Waits. I'm someone who's actually worked for everything I have. I'm someone who's taken responsibility for my mistakes instead of playing victim my whole career." "Playing victim?" Strahan rose to his feet, refusing to be intimidated. The two men now faced each other across the coffee table that suddenly seemed like the only thing preventing this from becoming physical. "You committed hate crimes, Mark. Actual hate crimes. And you think making a few movies gives you the right to talk down to me? I was 16 years old, and I've spent 30 years making up for it." Wahlberg shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. Several audience members in the background looked shocked, some covering their mouths in disbelief. "What's your excuse for being a bully right now? What's your excuse for ambushing a guest on live television?" "My excuse is that people like you think you can just buy your way out of accountability," Strahan shot back, pointing an accusatory finger across the table. "You think because you donate to charity and play nice guy in interviews that everyone's supposed to forget who you really are underneath all that Hollywood polish? And who am I really, Michael? Please enlighten everyone watching," Wahlberg challenged, spreading his arms wide in a gesture that was equal parts invitation and threat. Strahan stepped closer to the table, his voice dropping to a dangerous level that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "You're a violent criminal who got lucky in Hollywood. You're someone who hurt innocent people based on their race and now expects the world to treat you like a hero because you can memorize lines and look tough on camera. You know what you are." Wahlberg stepped closer as well, his voice matching Strahan's dangerous whisper, but carrying the weight of barely controlled rage. "You're a failed athlete who couldn't cut it when the real competition showed up. So now you sit behind a desk, throwing stones at people who actually accomplish something meaningful." "Failed athlete?" Strahan's voice cracked with rage. His composure was completely shattered now. "I played 14 seasons in the NFL. I was inducted into the Hall of Fame. I have a Super Bowl ring. What have you ever done that was real? What have you accomplished that wasn't handed to you by Hollywood executives?" "Real?" Wahlberg laughed harshly, a sound that held no humor whatsoever. "You want to talk about real? I built businesses from nothing. I created actual jobs for real people. I contribute to society instead of just sitting here in a comfortable chair attacking guests who come on your show in good faith." "Good faith?" Strahan scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. "You came here to promote another mindless action movie where you play the same character you always play. Don't act like you're doing the world some great service." "At least I'm creating something," Wahlberg shot back. "At least I'm putting myself out there and taking risks. What do you create, Michael? What do you build? You just tear people down on television and call it journalism." "I expose frauds," Strahan replied coldly. "I ask the questions that need to be asked. I hold people accountable for their actions, especially people who think their celebrity status makes them untouchable." "Untouchable?" Wahlberg's voice rose again, his face turning redder by the second. "I've been more transparent about my past than probably any other actor in Hollywood. I've owned every mistake, apologized to every person I could find, and spent decades trying to be better. What more do you want from me? I want you to admit that you don't deserve the platform you have, Strahan said with brutal honesty. I want you to acknowledge that someone with your history shouldn't be considered a role model for kids. I want you to stop pretending that money and fame wash away the blood on your hands. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Wahlberg's fists clenched at his sides, and for a terrifying moment, it looked like the interview might turn into something much worse than a verbal confrontation. The security personnel at the edges of the studio tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. "You're out of line," Wahlberg said through gritted teeth, his voice barely controlled. "You're way out of line and you know it." "Am I?" Strahan challenged, seeming to relish the fact that he'd pushed Wahlberg to this point. "Or am I just saying what everyone else is thinking, but too polite to say?" "You're a criminal, Mark. A violent criminal who hurt people because of their skin color. That's not ancient history. That's who you are at your core." "That's enough," Wahlberg exploded, his voice filling every corner of the studio with raw fury. The sound was so loud and sudden that several crew members actually jumped, and the cameras captured every detail of his rage-filled expression. "You want to keep pushing this? You want to keep attacking me personally? Fine. Let's talk about you for a minute." Strahan's eyes narrowed, but he maintained his aggressive stance. "Go ahead, Mark. Let's hear what the convicted felon has to say about me." "You really want to go there? You want to dig into people's personal lives and throw their worst moments in their faces?" Wahlberg asked, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Because I can play that game too, Michael." "I'm not the one with a criminal record," Strahan replied smugly, clearly thinking he held all the cards in this confrontation. "No, but you are the one who abandoned your teammates," Wahlberg shot back, his words hitting like bullets. "You are the one who quit on your team when things got tough. You want to talk about character? Let's talk about how you bailed on the Giants when they needed you most." Strahan's confident expression faltered for just a moment. "I retired because my body couldn't take it anymore." "That's not quitting. That's being smart." "Being smart?" Wahlberg laughed bitterly. "Or being selfish? You left millions of dollars on the table and walked away from your teammates because you couldn't handle the pressure anymore. At least when I screwed up, I was a kid. You were a grown man who abandoned the people counting on you." "That's not what happened. And you know it," Strahan snarled. But there was a defensive edge to his voice now that hadn't been there before. "Isn't it?" Wahlberg pressed, sensing weakness and going for the kill. "You spent years talking about how much you loved the game, how much your teammates meant to you, and then the moment things got difficult, you ran. You quit. And now you sit here in your comfortable studio job throwing stones at people who actually stick around when things get tough." "I gave everything to that team for 14 years, Strahan protested, his voice rising with genuine anger. "Now, did you though?" Wahlberg challenged, stepping even closer to the table that separated them. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you gave everything until it wasn't convenient anymore. At least when I made mistakes, I faced the consequences. You just ran away and expected everyone to thank you for it. You don't know what you're talking about," Strahan shot back, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier in the interview. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Wahlberg continued relentlessly. "I know you've spent your entire television career trying to prove you're more than just an ex-athlete. I know you go after guests like me because you're still trying to convince people you're a real journalist instead of just another pretty face reading a teleprompter. At least I didn't have to buy my way into respectability," Strahan fired back, trying to regain control of the confrontation. "Buy my way?" Wahlberg's voice cracked with indignation. "I earned every single thing I have. I started with nothing, made terrible mistakes, paid for them, and worked my way up through pure effort. You got handed a television job because you used to be famous for something else. We are not the same. We're exactly the same, Strahan insisted, his desperation starting to show. We're both trying to convince people we're something we're not. No, Michael, we're nothing alike, Wahlberg said with deadly certainty. I own my past. I've apologized for my mistakes and spent decades making amends. You can't even admit that you quit on your team when they needed you most. You can't even acknowledge that you got this job because of who you used to be, not because of any talent for journalism. I worked for this position, Strahan protested weakly. Did you? Wahlberg pressed mercilessly. Because it seems to me like you walked straight from the football field into the studio without paying any dues whatsoever. No journalism school? No years working your way up through small markets? No real experience asking tough questions? Just a famous name and a smile. Strahan's face was now flushed with anger and embarrassment. You think you're better than me because you went to jail and came back? You think that makes you some kind of hero? I don't think I'm a hero at all, Wahlberg replied with surprising calmness. But I think I'm honest about who I am and where I came from. Can you say the same? Can you honestly tell these viewers that you earned this job through journalism skills and not just because you used to be a football player? The question hung in the air like a challenge that Strahan couldn't meet. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The confident, attacking demeanor that had dominated the early part of the interview was completely gone, replaced by the look of a man who had been thoroughly exposed. That's what I thought, Wahlberg said quietly, his voice now carrying a tone of disappointed finality. You want to attack people's character? You want to dig into their past mistakes and throw them in their faces on live television? Maybe you should take a long look in the mirror first. This interview is over, Strahan said suddenly, his voice shaky and uncertain for the first time since the cameras had started rolling. Is it? Wahlberg asked, raising an eyebrow. Because I thought you were the one who wanted to have this conversation. I thought you were the one who wanted to ask the tough questions and hold people accountable. What happened to all that journalistic integrity you were talking about? Strahan looked around desperately, searching for help from his production team. But everyone seemed frozen in place, unsure how to handle the complete breakdown of what was supposed to be a simple promotional interview. You know what the real difference between us is, Michael, Wahlberg continued, his voice now carrying the weight of someone who had definitively won a battle. When I made mistakes, I faced them head-on. I went to jail. I did my time. I made my apologies. And I spent the rest of my life trying to be better. When you make mistakes, you just try to deflect and attack other people to make yourself feel better about your own failures. I haven't made any mistakes, Strahan said weakly, but even he didn't seem to believe it anymore. Haven't you? Wahlberg asked with a sad smile. Because this whole interview feels like a pretty big mistake to me. You had a chance to have a normal conversation with a guest who came here in good faith to promote his work. Instead, you chose to turn it into a personal attack because you thought it would make you look tough or important or like a real journalist. How's that working out for you? Strahan said nothing, his face a mask of defeat and humiliation. The confident morning show host who had started this confrontation was nowhere to be seen, replaced by someone who looked small and exposed under the bright studio lights. I came here to talk about my movie, Wahlberg said, straightening his jacket with deliberate calmness. I came here to connect with your audience and maybe tell a few stories that would entertain people. Instead, you decided to ambush me with personal attacks and try to embarrass me on live television. Well, congratulations, Michael. You got your confrontation. I hope it was worth it. With that, Wahlberg turned and walked off the set, leaving Strahan standing alone behind his desk, speechless and thoroughly defeated. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the host's humiliation as he struggled to find words that would never come. The silence in the studio was deafening, broken only by the quiet hum of equipment and the sound of Wahlberg's footsteps echoing as he disappeared through the exit. What had started as a routine morning show interview had become a masterclass in how not to treat a guest, and the entire television audience had witnessed every uncomfortable second of it. If you enjoyed this incredible breakdown of one of the most shocking moments in morning television history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments below what you think really motivated Michael Strahan to attack Mark Wahlberg so viciously on live television.